Welcome everyone to Beyond the Future of Work. I think most of you of the High Mind know my name. I'm Lou, and if you are new to this community, welcome. Usually Alison facilitates the salon, and before any of you gets worried, she's all right, she's here with us, and I think she's going to start the poll today as she usually does. But yeah, today will be a bit of a different format, and we will have a three-headed dragon facilitating Alison B, who is here today, and I will introduce in a minute, and yours truly. Today's topic is one I'm especially interested in, so I will introduce it for once, if you will have me. So today's topic is post-work. So what about post-workism? Well, work, to begin with, is really three things, says Peter Fraser, who is the author of Four Futures, which I really recommend reading on this topic. Work is the means by which the economy produces goods, the means by which people earn income, and an activity that lends meaning or purpose to many people's lives. And what he says is that really often we conflate these things, because today our economic system is such that we need to pay people to keep the lights on, so to speak. And this is something I think that became really, really painfully obvious with the COVID crisis. We discovered how strong the inertia of the hamster wheel was. We discovered that we just couldn't not stop. And but actually, in a future of abundance, you would not need, oh, hello, Alison, you would not need to pay people to keep the lights on. So a future without work would not be a future where everything crumbles. And so precisely, this is why we need to think about ways to make it easier and better to not be employed. This is super relevant today, especially in the context of like what the very recent past and our what's coming, in the sense that first, with the COVID crisis, the UBI became a hot topic with some super interesting, albeit of course insufficient to create a fully post-work society. So there was, like this Trump mini UBI, but historically, UBI is actually something that has received bipartisan support, interestingly. On the other side, we also have like sort of monstrous, looming, upcoming, probably financial depression. And financial depressions are moments where job and economic infrastructure restructuring tends to happen. So we might, after the next couple of downturn, emerge into a very different work or economic society. And we need to think now, like, about which society it will be. So that's the hot topic. Yeah, I think there are other sides, which is like during confinement, actually, those of us who are really lucky, which I'm sure some of you are likely part of, have discovered the joys of working from home, or for the luckiest, the joys of working from home on the countryside and just like being connected to nature and not going into an office every day. And I think this really, like, I saw around me some people being really transformed by this experience. On the other dark side, so for those who work, for instance, is their main source of social contact, have felt extremely socially isolated. So, this is all the things we need to start thinking about to imagine a post-work future. What's really clear is that we need to be intentional about it. That's the thing. And so I'm so glad that we are all here today to talk about this. So I hope, that through these few couple of examples, and there are many others, about the meaning of work, and I'm sure we're going to talk about them today, that shows that this is a topic, that the possibilities today seem significant enough, and the consequences disruptive enough, that we owe it to ourselves to start thinking about what society could look like without universal work. In an effort, of course, to start nudging it toward the better outcomes and away from the worst ones, which is what we always try to do here. So I'm super grateful for our speaker or introducer or facilitator, B, one of the heads of the dragon, to be bringing up this topic to our community for discussion today. B, you've been amazing, dear, beloved community member for years now, and you've been at many of our Foresight events. We've collaborated already on many projects related to AI because you work at the Partnership for AI. What are the things we need to know about you that are related to this topic, and why are you interested in it?
Thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to be with you all here today. And as Lou mentioned, my goal here is to set us up for a conversation and share a little bit of context from my experiences and the work that I'm doing presently at the Partnership on AI, but also in recognition of all of the incredible expertise. We're already getting some comments shared in the chat as well. I hope that you all will use your raise hand function and feel welcome to chime in after, maybe just the first 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes of presentation here. And I was going to show some slides, but I actually wanted to maybe be a little bit more interactive. So to start out, I actually thought something that might be good to think about as I kind of set us up here is just like take a moment and think to yourself about like some of your favorite tasks or things to do. Like I really enjoy certain tasks like sorting buttons. I really love. It's just very satisfying, like sorting things into different colors or shapes. I know my partner enjoys doing the laundry as a sort of meditative act. There are a lot of different types of tasks or activities or work that we perform that can feel very different to us depending on context. Gwen says cooking certainly is something that a lot of us get joy from, especially during these COVID times. And so I want to talk about this idea of kind of beyond the future of work. And I'm addressing it as beyond the future of work for two reasons. I want to talk about both, this idea of post-work and the future beyond work. But I also want to talk specifically about something that I think is upon us right now, which is also this future of work conversation. And to do that, I actually want to rewind a little bit and think about work more broadly, which Lou mentioned as well in this introduction. Thinking about what is work? How has work taken forms over time? We've seen divisions of labor existing perhaps even pre-Homo sapiens. We've had work compensation structures and employee evaluation processes existing since at least the Middle Kingdom or ancient Sumeria. We've seen work shift and transform over time through technologies, through political and social structures. And this is a moment that many of us feel is an inflection point, an opportunity for things to really shift as we look toward the future. And when we think about the future, I like to kind of think about that William Gibson quote, which is that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And we see this certainly in the workspace as well. So the future of work conversation that I hope that we will look beyond, I want to give a little bit of context to from my particular perspective. And Lou, you had asked, what is the context I bring to this? So a little bit of background on myself. I currently work at an organization called the Partnership on AI. It is an kind of multi-stakeholder AI ethics and governance organization. We bring together folks from kind of the big tech corporate AI development space, as well as civil society organizations like the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, Human Rights Watch, the ACLU, as well as a variety of academic partners such as the MIT Media Lab or Oxford Internet Institute. And the work that we do at the Partnership on AI is really around sort of charting out best practices for how people pursue the development of AI. We don't do a lot of AI research ourselves. Partners like OpenAI or Microsoft or others do more of the AI development. Our work is really around how can we ensure that as these technologies are developed, we can reduce harm and promote well-being or pro-social outcomes. Prior to working at the partnership, I worked at IBM in the Watson Group, which is their AI division. They're also one of the founding members of the Partnership on AI. And in that role, I really worked with cross-geo, cross-industry, like any of the clients that IBM was talking to about how AI might impact their industry. I would be in conversation with essentially helping them to understand, as a lot of these technologies were first being commercialized, how it is that AI might impact their industry. And this spawned a lot of these future of work conversations. And companies like IBM are very careful around these things, right? There's a big fear in society around automation and around AI technologies, and for good reason, not just in terms of these kind of very advanced AI technologies, but even the things that might be thought of as kind of the more readily accessible types of automation. Here in the US, certainly there's concern about it. Our director of policy, Lisa Dyer at the Partnership on AI, sometimes talks about policymakers' top 3 priorities. The first priority is jobs. The second priority, jobs. Third priority, jobs. So these are very big issues top of mind here. But I was just in a conversation with someone in South Africa yesterday talking about the responsible technology landscape there. And in places where unemployment is even higher in a pre-COVID state, we see that this resistance to automation or fear around automation is really high. So when companies are working on these tools, they're careful to talk about skill augmentation, human augmentation. It's not about artificial intelligence. It's about augmenting human intelligence. And I think that there is actually quite a lot of kind of like good faith pursuit there. Like I think people genuinely are trying to augment tasks or skills, but I've certainly been in plenty of client meetings where the IBMers in the room would say, well, we're not trying to reduce jobs. We're just trying to make them, like more impactful or more efficient. And the client says, well, I want to reduce jobs. So like, tell me what you can do, because that's actually my goal here. So when we think about future of work, this conversation is really, informed by this reality that there is a lot of fear and there's a lot of tension, and there's a recognition by everyone across the board that certain tasks or skills or processes are being automated, and that is going to have some tremendous impacts on the way that we organize ourselves and our relationship to kind of the products of our labor in the coming years. So that is the context in which the future of work conversation takes place. What is this future of work conversation? Well, what I'm seeing in a future of work kind of space is folks are thinking a lot about kind of this task-based approach, thinking about what skills or what capabilities are likely to be automated and which ones are not. So we see, especially in countries with aging populations, a growth in care work, growth in kind of these sort of complex strategic decision-making, but we see, a concern or a threat to work that is maybe more repetitive and more kind of discrete and task-based. We see that there's a shift toward a belief that perhaps entire roles aren't going to be automated away, but significant pieces of them are. So there's a strong push toward kind of upskilling and reskilling as people adapt to those changing circumstances. And there are some problems with this perspective because, right, remember, the future is not evenly distributed. So for one, the places like Japan or even the United States and a lot of these kind of more, for lack of a better word, developed economies have a population curve that isn't looking so hot in terms of how many young people are entering the workforce compared to how many older people are exiting it and still, requiring care and to be a part of society. And so one of the challenges here is that we see a lot of these spaces really pushing to automate those things because labor is expensive. There aren't that many young people. The work needs to get done. And so there's a desire to come up with ways to automate those tasks. But the problem is that in other economies and other places in the world where the population curve looks a little bit more like this, where there are a lot of young people, that shift toward automation in these kind of developed economy spaces actually spills over, whether welcomed or not, into these places as well. So while you could say, it makes sense in Japan maybe that we need to have, robotic healthcare or things like this, what happens is that once that investment in research and development is made, those technologies are then relatively easy to scale and export to places where perhaps that wasn't the necessary or desired approach. So what we're seeing in this shift is that places that have the capacity to develop a lot of these technologies are maybe doing so for their particular context, which maybe already is problematic. And then on top of that, those technologies are now being spread across the entire world where the impact on people is quite different. And one of the things that's especially challenging about this is that there's this idea that people can reskill, people can upskill. It's going to let's just teach everyone to code or whatever it is. But there are some important things to keep in mind here, which is as of about 2018, only about 50% of the world was online. So that's ambitious. If your solution to this is everyone learns to code, you need to have realism about, what's going to be accessible. We also see literacy rates around the world are not as high as someone maybe like myself was surprised to see that, from a US perspective, we maybe anticipate that literacy is almost universal, but it actually is not. And so when it comes to, using text-based interfaces like the internet is largely, especially when it is only in certain languages, this kind of upskilling or reskilling is not so feasible or realistic. So to Lou's question about, what does it mean then with this implication that, this future of work conversation about the jobs that will exist in the future, or the types of work that are less likely to be vulnerable to automation, we see that those aren't necessarily accessible to a lot of people, and they may be more location-based, or they may be, kind of limited in terms of what kind of resources or access you have to actually pursue them. So that's one big issue with this future of work conversation. Another big issue in the future of work conversation is around how people acquire work. We're seeing, perhaps we could think of this as kind of a replay of history, but we're seeing a big shift, especially right now during this pandemic, toward these kind of more informal or on-demand forms of work, whether they be gig work through these kind of platform economies, or the sort of hustle culture of, you could think of YouTube vloggers or things like that. We see a lot of shifts toward these less formal work relationships, which, people tout as giving freedom and things like this, but that's another way to look at that as maybe less security. And so there are a lot of questions as we look at it from the AI space as well about how gig work is allocated, who gets access to which work? How do we evaluate that work? You know, there's a big concern around like AI use in the HR space and whether or not it's biased. But like, if your HR is is YouTube's like content recommendation algorithm, like what is your recourse here? So another issue in this future of work conversation is, I think that it sort of belies the amount of informal or less structured work relationships that exist. So as we open up into a conversation here about moving beyond the future of work, I want to talk about post-work. I want to talk about what it means, what it could mean to exist or create worlds that aren't reliant on everyone being, everyone working for their sustenance or for their security or well-being. But I also want us to talk a little bit about like what that transition looks like and how we handle these somewhat harsh realities about what the landscape looks like right now and what challenges we face in the very near term, even when we don't have this kind of widespread automation that many of us anticipate. And, I'd also love to hear from folks. I think that it was Astra Taylor in Logic Magazine in a piece called The Automation Charade, coined the term photomation, and talking about how a lot of work, for instance, like the self-checkout at the grocery store, isn't really an automation. It's just a transferring of paid work onto the customer where it's now unpaid labor. And I'd love for us to also talk about if you have experiences with or thoughts about the ways in which these changes or these reframes around automation also are changing the way in which we view different types of work as being work versus not, and what that means for this transition period as we try to move past this kind of flawed conversation into something that hopefully is a more productive and prosperous future for us all. So that's my setup, a little bit of context where I'm coming from. I would love for you all to jump in, and Lou and Allison and I will, and it looks like we maybe have some additional help as well in terms of moderation. So if you'll, since we do have a larger group, use your hand raise function in the Zoom, which you can access through the participant menu, then that'll help us to avoid talking too much over each other, and feel free to use the chat as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bea. And just like for the facilitation and flow of the conversation, I don't think people can unmute themselves. So if you have a question or something you want to say, maybe say it in the chat in case we don't see you with the hand raise function. And there are many people in this call also who are working on post-work futures. And by the way, I think we should share, so I think we should definitely hear from those folks. We have some friends here, Andra, who is leading like a project which is a call to artists, who is like about imagining a city beyond work, so artistic contribution, and I would hope for Andra to tell us about it at some point. And what else did I want to say? Oh, I wanted to share the results of the poll while you're thinking about your questions and myriad of interventions. So the fifth question we had asked was, what do you consider to be your primary identity in relation to work? With the first one being student, so we have no students. Employees, we have 8 people. This is like a third of us. Entrepreneur is a third of us also, 9 people. Gig worker, we have 2. We have 3 retired people, congratulations. And we have 4 decidedly post-work people. So yes, we are full on in the topic. And, maybe some of us that didn't get to vote are also considering themselves post-work. So, all right, how should we go about it? Is there someone who wants to ask a specific question? Ted, do you want to elaborate on your question that you put in the chat, or is it more like of a chat kind of question, or we don't know, or maybe Andra wants to say something, so maybe you can tell us about your project.
Yeah, sure. So the project is the call for artists. We want to gather art pieces from different kinds of artistic works, be it paintings or graphic art or architecture or I don't know, AR effects or essays around the idea of how a city without, how a city would look like in a world where we don't have to work to sustain ourselves. So the project is called the Post-Work City. And we have a call for arts until the end of August. And we plan on doing an online exhibition after we gather the most interesting artworks. And of course, we also plan to do a series of debates around this topic. So you are welcome to join or submit your art if you want to. Something else I wanted to point around this post-work discussion is that oftentimes when we think about work, we only think about paid jobs, paid work, paid employment. So we kind of forget the work that is usually done, for example, in the household, the reproductive labor, the care work, all the domestic tasks, the care of the children, and it's interesting that usually this work was taken by women, but now that women are in the workplace, this work is kind of has transitioned to usually low paid, it was privatized and it was transitioned to low paid workers, migrant women, or people from poor backgrounds. And there's this, so what would be, my question is, what would be the solution to this situation? Should we be more open to the automation of care work, especially, for example, technologies of care robots and so on? How will we deal with that? And Nancy Fraser, who is a critical theorist and a feminist, actually proposes 3 alternatives. The first is the universal breadwinner model, where everyone has to have a job, both women and men, and the state provides for childcare, for domestic work, for I don't know if you hear me. Okay. And the second would be the universal caregiver model, where both women and men are taking up care and there is paternal leave. And the third, which is not that sustainable, is the caregiver parity model, she says, where women are still taking up care, but they are paid by the state to do so. So basically, they are, and even if they are employed, there is sort of like there are brief working arrangements or more flexible working hours for women. But this is actually problematic because it increases the gender divide. So Yeah, for me, this would be an interesting question. What kind of technologies, if we are open to technologies of care, because there are all sorts of debates around care robots and assistive technologies, if they are really able to replace humans or maybe are complementary to workers, to humans. So yeah.
Yeah, those are super interesting points, Andra, and it does clarify a little bit like what I think we mean and the definitions of work in here. And because I think it's important indeed that we start on the same foot. I think Zarina will help us clarify, because I think Zarina, you know like exactly what we're talking about here when we mean post-work, which is not like a future where no one does anything, or no one ever does something productive, or no one like ever undertakes or any endeavor, but it is a future where there is no involuntary labor. Zarina, can you unmute yourself?
Unmute. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I just want to clarify this a little bit, because I think, when we talk about post-work, people tend to get confused about whether we mean just like, oh, we just all get to lie in our houses doing nothing. And I think this quote really helped me clarify this. So this is Andre Gorz. The abolition of work does not mean the abolition of the need for effort, the desire for activity, the pleasure of creation, the need to cooperate with others and be of some use to the community. Instead, the abolition of work simply means the progressive but never total suppression of the need to purchase the right to live by alienating our time and our lives. The abolition of work means the freeing or liberation of time so that individuals can exercise control over their bodies, their use of themselves, their goals, and their productions. The demand to work less does not mean or imply the right to rest more, but the right to live more. That's farewell to the working class. And, this is essentially the life that most wealthy people already have, and I think for those of us who've like really had a lovely shelter in place, this is what's happened. People have regained autonomy over their time and when they choose to show up in the world. I've heard lots of people talking about discovering their chronotype, which is like your circadian rhythm. Lots of people have discovered that their optimal circadian rhythm does not fit the 9-to-5 workday, and like the knock-on effects of being enforced to live within a specific time frame is likely huge. And I just want to clarify that, like, automation is obviously a sort of lovely way of thinking about how we might get to a sort of autonomy over our working day or our living day, let's say, but it's only one. There are other ways, like, I think what's happened with the NHS in England is really interesting. So they, when coronavirus struck, the NHS, which is our free health service, was about to be completely overloaded, and they put a call out for volunteers. They got 750,000 volunteers in 3 or 4 days, which was, I think, like 4 or 5 times more than what they needed. And it just sort of goes to show that, like, we just don't explore other ways of divvying up work that like value autonomy. And I think when humans have time, they do want to show up in the world, So okay, I'm just going to end with that.
Great. Thank you so much for putting everything square and well defined again. And yeah, I'm kind of glad to give, to let Ted speak, but I think I will need to unmute you first. So hold on a second. Because there was already some very interesting, debate in the chat that you started there.
Yeah, I think that worked.
Yeah, I think you
Wonderful.
Can speak now.
First of all, I guess I want to thank B for posting this on Facebook, so I saw it. This is the first time I've joined one of your sessions, so it's always nice. It can get cacophonous when you have a lot of people talking, but I guess the definition of work was very helpful. And this idea of voluntary or involuntary, work for everyone unless you're in servitude is voluntary. If you think it's involuntary, then you need to rethink about what you're doing with your life. And perhaps the conversation is more about the future of money versus the future of work. Because as an artist, if you're painting a canvas, that's work. It's an effort, right? Now, if you're paid for that or something else, that's the substitution of your work for something you can exchange. And so is it a conversation about a future of work, or is it a conversation really about a future of effort as it's translated in money? And so that's something I think is kind of a broader conversation. I don't want to derail the main topic, but I thought I'd bring that up. And then I guess finally, as we look at 8 billion people on this beautiful planet, we do a lot of stuff in space. I do projects for students. We run projects on the space station. From that vantage point, there are no borders. There are no countries. There's one planet. And we have to think about agency. And I think when we think about work, the future of money, it's about ensuring that individuals have agency in their future. And the systems that are in place today don't necessarily facilitate that. And why don't I just end it there?
Yeah, that's right. And work, there is definitely the economic definition of it, and not having work. Of course, we need to rethink how we do money. And I think there is, it would be very hard for it to happen by itself. And we need, we can think about a new way to allocate the redistribution of money, if it still exists, and how we can even, you were talking, Andra, of imagining the government paying women to realize some work, but we could think of maybe a platform on a larger level, maybe a society post-work, which is not a society without effort, is a society that needs some coordination mechanism to distribute the offer in terms of effort and the demand. So does that happen through the intermediation of money? I don't know. Maybe is there anyone who has an idea about this or wants to pile on
I could jump in on that a little bit as well, which is part of why I started this conversation around the future of work, around the history of work, because I was actually quite intrigued by this question of when were different structures of kind of compensation introduced, from work as a cooperative effort to work as kind of a social relationship to another party, and this sort of act of exchange. And I think that when we think about post-work, when I think about post-work societies, or the transition that it takes for us to move toward a post-work society, I think that we're not talking about the removal of effort or exertion or kind of the practice of doing things, but rather kind of pulling away the need for exchange in response to that behavior, or being predicated on that behavior, as to Andra's point around there being other decisions made around exchange. And I think that folks in the comments as well have talked about things like UBI. I'm particularly interested in this topic as it relates to both what can governments and formal institutions do in this case, but also looking at it from a perspective, and this is where I think the work that Andra introduced with the post-work city and Zarina mentioned as well is really significant in terms of all of our role in envisioning and realizing those futures, and kind of maybe interrogating our relationship with exchange as it relates to effort or production. And I think that there are also roles to be had in technology. And I think Zarina made a really good point to say, post-work doesn't necessarily look like, fully automated gay space luxury communism or whatever the series of words now are. But it may include types of automation. And Andra talked too about this kind of question around like which things actually, like, do we want to automate these things? And part of what I wanted to illustrate with this opening conversation around the future of work and the problem with this conversation taking place presently around the future of work is that it does presume certain types of automation, and it sort of doesn't reflect the reality of the impact of those types of automation on the world and the realities that are very exchange-based that many people face as a part of their survival. And so I hope that, you know, I tend to be pretty bullish on automation. Like, I think that there are a lot of good things about it, but I also think that it's really worth interrogating. And I think it might have been Tantek or someone had put in, oh no, I think it was Ted actually put in the chat also a question around, you know, is post-work something that has to be digital or kind of facilitated through technology, or is it actually maybe more a social relationship, a social technology rather than a information or mechanized technology?
What do you think?
I think that it is some of each. So I think that there are things that we like. Technologies, like in the material sense or the information technology sense, can be tremendously valuable for us to, you know, like clothing or shoes. Like shoes are a really great technology that allow us to like walk in places that would hurt our feet. And so I think to that extent, you know, there is a real role for technology to play. And I think that one of the challenges in our society, and I was thinking of this recently as it relates to how we do exchange and how we value jobs, is like thinking about some of my friends who work at places like Google, who maybe do like high value work in the economic sense, but like they actually do work that I think a lot of people would like to do. And they get like all of the snacks and the goodies of working at an organization like that. Whereas like a lot of folks that do the work that, if you were looking at it from a pure supply and demand perspective, like is like not pleasant work, and most of us probably wouldn't want to do. Often those jobs are actually poorly compensated and quite terrible. And it's sort of like a weird relationship there. And so I do think that there might be opportunities for technology or automation to play a role in helping to address that. But I also think that it's very dangerous for people like me. I think a lot of these conversations do sort of take as a presumption, like a lot of what you hear in the AI space, even when people are like talking about augmented intelligence and avoiding getting rid of jobs or whatever, people will make a statement about what they think is worth doing. Like, oh, we're getting rid of all of those like mundane, repetitive tasks so that you can focus on the real human creative stuff, which is almost a way of dehumanizing the people that do that labor. And so I think that there's an important conversation for us to have about actually what work is worth doing and what work do we enjoy. There was an article written, I'm wondering if I had it written down here, the name of it, that talks about, it says, it's called like automation is coming for your favorite menial tasks. And it's basically saying like those kind of like repetitive, the button sorting tasks that I love are actually like the things that are being automated, and we leave ourselves with just like the stressful, unpleasant, always changing work, which like some of us view as like creative and awesome, but that is sort of like coming from a place of presumptuous about the creators. And I think that it's actually more a reflection of what we were able to automate rather than like what is the most human thing. We always define what is the most human in the negative space of things that we can get technology to do. And as technology becomes more capable, like what becomes human shrinks, which I think is something dangerous to hang your hat on, I guess, as your kind of guiding star. But I know Anna also had a comment as well.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you may not be able to unmute.
Hold on. I'll try to do that.
I can do it.
Oh, great. And Erin has a comment too, I think, after.
There we go. All right. Hi, my name's Anna. Good to see so many familiar faces. Yeah, I just wanted to share a few words on the comment you made about is like, yeah, post-work future that is not digital. And I'm getting a firsthand impression of that in my current life. And I just wanted to share what I'm seeing. And I'm coming from living in San Francisco for 7 years and, you know, definitely coming from the digital side. And I've spent the last year and a half in between New Zealand and Australia, working very little. And I've found a few communities that are essentially living without work. I have a lot of friends who are not technical, who aren't skilled, who don't have university degrees, who've kind of like turned their lives turned away from this like 9 to 5, this rat race, and are finding ways to live like by working very little or none at all. And the first instance of that is this community I've been living in Melbourne. And in Melbourne, there's like quite a big, vibrant, like squat artist warehouse scene. And you know, I was living in this big community. Our rent was like $80 a week, and essentially minimum wage in Australia is $20 an hour. And so you'd have to work 4 hours at the most, like minimum wage job to make all of your, like meet all of your basic needs. Or you could work for, you know, like a month and then like not work for 6 months. And that's what a lot of people there were doing. And I think it was a combination of like, you know, the context, the minimum wage, how affluent the country was and so forth, and combined with like this attitude of like just living outside the system. So, you know, we didn't have running water, we collected rainwater. It was in a super like space zone for living. So a lot of what we had to do was put in a lot of time in order to, everyone there was very time rich, but resource poor. Everyone was home all day, spending time together, painting, putting in work into the house. Dumpster diving was a really, really big part of the culture. And we were feeding 30, 40 people 2 meals a day, every day, off of food we just found for free in the bins. And the inside of this warehouse looks like a year-long Burning Man camp. And everything that was built there was just like randomly found material on the street or out of like hardware store bins. I did not know how much was possible without money, and I'm like absolutely shocked at what I'm seeing here. And even now in New Zealand, a lot of those friends have come over and we're living in this other big artist warehouse space. And a lot of my friends aren't paying rent, and they're just like helping run this venue. They're running events every night. They're having fun doing this. You know, they spent 2 full days in the park picking up like branches and leaves to set up like the decor in the warehouse for a party we were planning. By the way, we don't have COVID anymore, so events are a thing again. But and it's really interesting to see, and they've been like volunteering at the food bank and dumpster diving. So they're not spending on food, they're not spending on rent, and they're spending all of their time in community and like kind of like redefining their relationship with work. So I am seeing a lot of that in bubbles outside of the Bay Area, and it is possible and is really interesting to witness firsthand and to live. So I do think that there are like interesting ways that people will begin spending their time if they are given ownership of their time back or choose to do so in more radical ways. But I think if we just give people back time in our current like kind of setting, I think a lot of people would really struggle. And I think that we need to really like shift from like in this like atomic like individual life to community life. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to live with a lot of people, but once you have more time, there should be communities you feel aligned with that are there so you can pour your energy into that and derive meaning and purpose out of that as opposed to work, which is what it's been like for a lot of people. Yeah, I'll stop there, but happy to talk more if anyone has questions.
That's super awesome. Thank you, Anna, for sharing. And yeah, I have a few, I think it's a super interesting example because I love, to think about what already exists, because sometimes the futures we imagine seem so far-fetched, but actually they are, right beyond our feet already. And I think there were a lot of interesting points that you brought up. I think there is, this idea that we would really need to change the way we think about work, because one, we have this social cultural context of, especially in the US, the American cult of work for the sake of work, or like, how much work is linked to identity in the US. Like, this is the first question people ask you when they meet you is, what do you do? And, me, it always shocks me as a French person. We do not have this culture, let me tell you. I'm sure we are like famous sort of for that, but it can seem almost rude, like to sometimes ask people like what they do, because they don't want to talk about work outside of work. Yeah. I think French people would be very easy to convince into a post-work culture. But more seriously, thinking about like how we would change other ways our society could change is, our leisures. And I think today leisures, like when you look at people who don't work, it tends to be a lot of TV and video games, which, some people could take this as an indication that really people who don't have work are not going to do anything and everything is going to fall apart. But, you're going to also think about it under other framework, which is most people who don't work because they have such an identity crisis can be really depressed or socially isolated, because unemployment is isolating. So thinking about how we could have a whole sort of like different nourishing forms of leisure. And, recently I've seen, since we, are evolving in this technology space, I've seen like how VR has changed so much, and we could imagine people with cyber existences, with super rich and social virtual lives, which is a topic that we've discussed in the past months a lot here in this community. Has everything has transitioned online. So I think here again there is something that's really bubbling up. And another side I think that's very interesting to think about in the post-work society is thinking differently about creativity, craftsmanship, because we've had this, very standardized production in factories in the recent years. But if we had robots that eliminated traditional jobs, then we could think about like a new form of artisanal economy appearing. Let's say, if you think about new technology like 3D printers that would help people create customized things almost as cheaply, as the things we produce today, but then like integrating their craftsmanship, their art, so could really change the landscape. And I think this, we can see it budding today in seeing what people have made of things like YouTube, for instance, and just having the cheap availability of some artistic tools has empowered like millions and millions of people to produce culture right from their living rooms. And, everyone is an artist and everyone can speak to the entire world. And I think these kind of activities really do offer the virtues that many organizational, really offers what we see as the virtues of work, which is a sense of independence, the chance to develop mastery, expertise, and of course, a sense of purpose. I think I had said that Erin.
Oh, you're muted now, Lou. I can unmute Erin.
Okay. Okay, looks like I'm not muted. I'll just offer my perspective because there's a lot of different moving parts from what I'm seeing. So overall, my concern is that the work doesn't get done. So it's a different, like, I still feel like we're a little bit in our Bay Area bubble here, but in my day-to-day workplace, construction has labor shortage, logistics and warehousing has labor shortage, manufacturing has labor shortage, agriculture has labor shortage. And I sell robotics and automation components, LiDAR, for a living. And although we do assume the robots will be perfectly capable at some point in the future, it's also a possibility that the robotic automation does not do these jobs very well. We are seeing a huge uptick in warehouse automation, but it's still constrained. The robots are really focusing on doing the repetitive manual labor tasks. So people don't break their backs anymore. So they can actually keep an employee beyond like their broken back in 18 months. Employees are project managers. So this slides over to the other argument of we need livable wage. We want to incentivize people to do meaningful work. If I want to paint a picture of a future, nobody has to do mundane manual labor and injure themselves. They will be project managing tools. That's where the robots come in. The robots are just tools that need to be project managed, need to be observed, need to be fixed. We have a shortage of trades. Warehouses don't have enough like electricians. We need electricians, plumbers. In fact, I was thinking of like studying to become a home electrician just for fun because I want zombie apocalypse skills. You know, what happens when everything gets decimated? We need infrastructure. Infrastructure, facilities managers, again, electricians and plumbers. If people need places to live, those jobs will stay. And there's an erosion of skills in those areas. We need more people trained. You know, the list goes on where what I think is unfair right now is, again, minimum wage is far too low. We need to raise that up to a livable wage. Another thing that's slightly unfair is I'm a strong proponent for how, as a society, do we incentivize with value and perhaps with money, like people who choose to caregive for other people deserve to, you know, like how do we further support the caregivers? If you're caring for elderly parents, if you are a parent with children, how even volunteer roles, those people deserve to live. It's work that should be paid somehow or supported somehow. So I guess like my overall worldview is I want a culture where we celebrate work and people get paid for it, because work isn't bad. I mean, I know there's an American culture class thing of you know, what is your role, but like being a great electrician is a form of art. Like helping people is satisfying. Like being valued for the skills that you can bring to the table. And I worry that there's going to be too much erosion into this idea. And I kind of, I want to nitpick on retirees a little bit. Like we've sold this American dream that not working is luxury. And I see all these retirees sitting on their asses. And is that a satisfying life? I mean, maybe to some they want to chill out, but how can we like support, like there's so many kids that need to be educated. How can you volunteer? Like how can we get people involved again in their communities? Because it's that kind of engagement that brings a satisfying life, and work and engaging and like providing a skill set that I've developed to somebody else that has value is very satisfying. So I just don't want to make sure people shoot themselves in the foot at 18 years old and assume that not working is the luxury and the lifestyle that's appealing, because they kind of miss out on the opportunity to gain a really amazing skill set and share that with the world. So that's my 2 cents.
I am very sad because I unfortunately am going to have to drop from this conversation, although I hope that you all will continue it because it is excellent. But I did want to just say, like, Erin, I really appreciate you bringing that lens. And I think there is so much that comes from our particular cultural context. It was actually at the last Foresight annual conference, I think it was Christine Peterson who said, talking about the digital realm versus outside of the digital space, as I live in meat space, or as she said it, dirt space, because we're so tied to the earth of where we are, and our geographic context shapes so much of our view of both what the future should look like, as well as the resources that may or may not be available in those spaces. So I'm grateful that we've had also in the side channel of the chat a lot of really good questions from those of you joining, bringing all kinds of different cultural contexts to this conversation as well, to really, I am actually in San Francisco at this moment, so I am definitely clouded by that lens of thinking. But I think that there is important work to be done, and to your point too, I think a lot of folks in communities of disability would also reflect on kind of both like what work participation looks like and what is accepted, and what value different people can bring, as well as the like deep discomfort and isolation that comes from a culture that places so much of your social network into your work sphere, and those who aren't welcomed into the workspace actually can be quite removed of society or even invisibilized by that. So I'm really grateful for you all to bring up those points, and I wish I could continue this conversation. I hope you will. But I welcome you also if you want to reach out and learn more about any of the work that I'm doing, or I'll share with you all also this Shared Prosperity Initiative, which is a project underway at the Partnership on AI, asking some of these questions around what is the role of technology innovators in thinking about the economic impacts, or like the economic well-being of people impacted by their technology. So if you have thoughts on that, I hope that you'll reach out about it as well. But thank you so much to Lou, Allison, and everyone for organizing and joining. It's been such a joy, and I wish I could stay, but next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for starting this conversation. This was a fantastic discussion already. If you really feel a ton of FOMO, I guess we'll continue this conversation for 30 minutes or so, and you can always watch the video to catch up. But yeah, I want to let you go, and thank you so much. So
thank you.
Bye, Bea. Yeah, and Erin, this was like a really great point, I think, and you a challenge that you mentioned I had thought about, and I think is quite interesting, which is, for instance, okay, so if there is no, so work is an incentive to get an education. Also, learning for the sake of learning is, of course, there will still be in a post-work society people doing that, but there are some work courses, or let's say some professions that ask for tremendous efforts and very, very hard work to get there. And we can always think like, okay, will people be incentivized to do that? And also, will people be incentivized to get into different forms of education, really get in a field, realize that this is not where their calling is, which is, sometimes by doing the wrong thing, we realize what is the right thing for us. So how will people discover their talent? How will they discover things like, the rewards that come with expertise? If they don't see incentives to develop it either. And this question was asked actually in an article that I read, which is fantastic. I really recommend it if you want to a little bit of a comprehensive overview on this issue. I'm going to paste it now in the chat. So they were asking this question, and the suggestion of the solution that was proposed there was to have small payments for young people for them to attend and complete college. So having paid skill training programs or some sort of community center workshops. And saying it may seem super radical, but what I found interesting is, the goal is conservative because it is to preserve the status quo of an educated and engaged society. And yeah, with in mind the idea that whatever they do, the young people will sooner or later become citizens, and that society has to find a way to prepare them in this way. But, I think there are a lot of very questionable ways society today prepares us to be citizens. Actually, it's not doing such a great job at the moment. It prepares education prepares us to be workers, but it does not really teaches us to be good participants in societies and good stewards of our world. So my hope for a post-work society is that we'll do a better job at this. The chat does, maybe Tentec, I see you participating so much. Would you like to intervene, summarize a little bit like the chat conversations? Because I feel like I'm not sure I can catch up, but it would be great to have it voiced here in the main call. I will find you and mute you if you're okay to chat, to talk.
Sure. I think if I was going to I'll just raise a couple of questions. One is the question of status, like the observation that Americans talk about work, or it's like the first question we ask, seems like it's centered around status, which is to say that that's not something that's missing in other cultures, or other countries, it's just different. We talk about where our people are from, or what's their family, or perhaps even direct questions about their class. And so all those seem like proxies for status, which seems like almost like a harder question to ask. Like, even if no one is working, does that mean we've somehow eliminated the concept of status and everything that's like tied to that? I don't know. And I would add, I was kind of like challenge the panelists to think about, does beyond work, like post work, mean post status? And so like, how does that work? And then the other question that discussion is coming up is about hazardous work. And I was just asking there about like, kind of like following what you're talking about, Lou, who's going to be incentivized to do like the hazardous or harmful or dangerous jobs, or will we turn it into a kind of a sport, just like there are extreme athletes that do really risky things? Will there be like extreme volunteer workers that do risky work? But that then again also ties into the former question about status, which is like extreme sports. There's one aspect of it that's perhaps like adrenaline or personal satisfaction, but that's also tied to status as well. So I'm kind of curious what the panelists think how those concepts weave together are dependent, or how we might untangle them.
Unfortunately, the panelist has left the call, so the question may remain a mystery unless someone actually wants to take this on. Yeah, go for it, Andra.
I think that status related to the question, does post-work mean post-status? I think that status can be acquired also through artistic work or creativity and doing art, maybe. So yeah, I don't think that status will disappear if we don't have work anymore.
I think we might reprioritize status, because current status is based on values that prioritize some more economic factors of production.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could, when you see like, you know, being an artist or being housewives, which are like such incredibly important functions of society, like creative pursuit and the creation of beauty and care work and like raising the future generation are like central, but like no one can tell the parents, you know, when they're young, like I'm going to be an artist, or like most people, I'm going to be an artist, or like I'm going to be a housewife, and the parents would be like, or a house, you know, a house parent. Not a lot of parents would be excited at the prospect. And there are many more like this. So I think maybe in the context of a society of abundance, where we could reprioritize our values to be more about community stewardship, like good stewardship of our world. Yeah. I'll let your imagination do the rest. Okay, anyone? Sorry, I was muted. Andra, did you want to say something?
No, I was. Well, yes, I just wanted to give another prompt for our participants to the chat to take a look at the Post-War City Initiative and maybe submit something if they feel like it. Yeah. So I think that somehow the whole abolition of work thing, like the post-work, what happens if we don't work anymore, I don't think it's in the sense of we're gonna stop helping our community, or we're gonna stop doing work even if it feels good for us. It doesn't necessarily mean idleness, or we're gonna do nothing, rest all day. It probably means that we would have more time to do things for ourselves that money can buy. And I think that this is like we should see, or rather look at the post-work vision from this point of view. Will it bring us more creativity? Will it be a future not of consumption but of craftsmanship and artistry? So yeah.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Well, that's a sort of perfect segue into the end of this call, and we can maybe close it. And for those who want to continue the discussion and maybe share about, you know, what work is for them, or what they really would like to do, maybe imagining a post-work society, you know, ask yourself, like, if money really wasn't an issue, what would you be doing right now? I think it's always a very interesting question to ask yourself. Like, and, you know, if we think about this very far away future, or maybe just decades from now, let's hope, maybe future historians will see the 20th century as a weird moment, with a religious devotion to hustle culture and overworking, in a time where actually there was more prosperity than ever, with less accent on the values of service to the family, and the mixing of income and self-worth, like misplaced values. And so I hope we think about how we can create a post-work future that favors primarily local communities and a really different set of ethics and values. Bye, it was a pleasure to see you, especially all the, there were many of you I was so happy to see, and I'm glad also for the new faces. So bye-bye.